there, guys. Welcome to week 2 of Dynamics and Simulation. Today I'm going to go over the second in-class assignment, which is raining arrows, or a wall of arrows. You can get an update here on the week 2 from the Brightspace page. I've included a PDF version of this tutorial, which you can see right here, that basically walks you through, again, more information, Particles 101, the different types of particles that can be created, emitters, dynamics, collisions, all that we're going to use in this tutorial. Again, just be aware that the old version does say 72480. We're actually looking for 1920, 1080, and I'll explain that when we do the output from Maya as far as creating a play blast, or just to see the performance, or even a render. So what we're doing today is we're talking about instanced mesh particle effects. This is kind of the effect you see in a lot of these movies, whether it be 300 or Lord of the Rings or something, where you have the entire sky filled with arrows to create that illusion. And what we're going to do is we're going to build a simple arrow. We're going to make sure that it's pointing in the positive X direction, because that's the direction that you want all your instances to be aimed in, and building an emitter that shoots a wall of arrows. So it kind of walks you through here the basic process of doing this. So let me go ahead and open up Maya and walk you through the process of getting things going here. All right. So again, when you launch Maya, this is typically what you get, but remember, your settings need to be customized, and most importantly, like with all Maya projects, you want to set project. So I'll hit OK, stretch the timeline out to the default of 200 frames here, and again, turn off my auto key and make sure my playback is set to 24 frames per second. But more importantly, it's play every frame. Save, and let's go ahead and set project. So we come here, project window, hit new, so we're no longer in our candle project, and we can call this arrow project. And make sure we choose the correct location to put this, which is going to be in back, and you see here I've got a project folder for everything already built. Let's just go to raining arrows, hit select, and hit accept. Now again, what that basically means is here inside we get an arrows project in our proper folder, and we have folders for everything we're going to need, whether they be the playblast movie, whether it be the scene, which is what we'll save as an arrows scene. Also, if we render, we get the images. We're going to get things called assets. That's where we're going to drop our little arrow, just so we have it saved in there, and we can get going in terms of that. So, in order to get going here, the first thing we need to do is build a simple arrow pointing in the X direction. So to do that, I'm actually going to hit spacebar again, and I'm going to do a modeling technique here that basically is a shortcut way of building a simple small arrow. Remember, we can always scale this. So to do this, I'm going to go create curves, CV curve tool. And to build this arrow, remember, we're going to do a couple simple techniques here. Okay, I'm just going to click, and if I hold in the X key, it will click to the grid point there. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to put a double click here. Remember, double click basically ensures we get a straight line, or a sharp corner, I mean, if we double click. Let's click here. Now you see I've got a rounded outline. I'll correct that later. Let's click here. Then double click, double click, double click. Okay? Hit enter to get our CV curve. You can see it's putting this on the center axis. Whenever you create geometry, it automatically drops the axis here at 0, 0, 0 in the XYZ coordinates. Now, I'm going to use what I used last week to make the simple candle of a revolve option box. This is where we can actually designate how it's going to revolve. So it's going to revolve a 360 sweep. I'll give it 8 segments, that's fine. We want to do a value of 4 so that we can actually create the arrows, the feathers rather. Let's go as polygons, not NURBS, which is the default, but polygons. Change this to be quads. Do a general tessellation method, and change this bottom one to span and span. Now the value here is currently set to 3 and 3. What that basically means is that between each click of those isoparms creating the curve or the vertices, it's going to add 3 segments between each click. Let's go ahead and hit revolve. Now, you notice it didn't revolve around the correct axes. So I could actually come over here and see that it's actually going around the y-axis over here in the attribute editor here. So I'm going to change that to be 0. And you see now we get the shape of the arrow, and I'm probably going to see, is it going to be a 1? Nope, that's going to be a 0. So remember, this basically represents revolving around the axes of the x, the y. What we want is a 1 on the z. Now recall though, you notice that it is black. It is black because the normals are the wrong direction. Okay? You also see in the tessellation, let's see, where am I at here, revolved, that I did originally do a 3 by 3 by 3, which I'm actually finding to be a little bit too many. So let me change this down to 4 and simplify that down. So instead of 8 sections, I'm doing 4, so I have just less geometry. We don't need this to be heavy or fancy. This should be very lightweight. But remember, instance geometry means it doesn't matter. So I could have this be a spaceship, I could have this be an airplane, I could have this be an animated character, and the instance is not just a pure copy, but a sample copy. So again, the geometry is not heavy. But what we need to do is we need to reverse the normals here. And that can be done here if I go to the display, for example, and turn on the face normals. You'll notice that the little green hairs are not showing. That's because they're pointing inward. What we need to do is reverse the surface. So I come here, I did this last week, and we're going to surface reverse. I can't remember exactly where this is. Let's see, mesh tools, edit mesh. Here it is. Yes? No? It's funny how I lost this last week too. Just looking for, it should be just a simple reverse. Never find this. Here it is here, reverse. So mesh display, reverse. And now you see that the green, we switch to, you can see the little green hairs are now sticking up out of the positive direction of the geometry. So I can actually go to display now and turn off my face normals to get the basic geometry. And this is where, believe it or not, I still have the curve. And if I hold shift and drag everything here, and then shift and deselect my geometry, you're going to see that I actually have the curve still selected. So if I hit F8, I can get in here now and still adjust and change the shape of my geometry at this point. See? Because I have not deleted history yet on my surface. Go ahead and hit F8 again to get back to object mode. Hit this. And now what I'm ready to do is just delete the history of this. So that's edit, delete by type history, and now I can actually eliminate the curve I used to build this geometry, and that'll allow me to right click and let's go by edge. So again, I can double click to do an edge loop and start to customize the shape of this arrow. So let's go to vertex, and with the vertex mode, zoom out a little bit, I can now shape this into a better looking arrow. Hit the space bar, let's go into this mode here. Okay, and now I've zoomed in on my arrow here so I can grab some edges. Or not edges, I'm sorry, faces. And I'm going to go face, face, face. Let's go to the opposite side here. Face, face, face. Face, face, face. And face, face, face. You can see I've selected every other one here. And now we're going to do an extrude. So edit mesh, extrude, tool in the up direction, you see, to create the beginning of the feathers. Remember, this does not need to be heavy geometry. Oops. And because you see I'm trying to move these feathers back to make it look like feathers for the arrow here, I can even, watch this, even scale them to thin them out. But to move them backward, I just switch to the W tool, and that allows me now to slide them back. And so you see now, we have a simple arrow. Now again, it doesn't have to be a fancy arrow here. Remember, we want to be able to see it, but we don't need a lot of geometry, because again, these are going to be flying through the air. We're not going to get close up using this. And let's just switch to object mode. So you see, I've got this. The problem, of course, you see, it's got a couple issues. We go back to our tutorial here, right? The arrow's pivot point must be located at the base by the feathers, and the arrow must be pointing in the positive X direction, i.e. as if it's laying down. Well, my arrow, number one, the pivot is in the center at 0, 0. So how do we move a pivot point back? We hit the insert key. All right, so to move the pivot point, now the old school shortcut key for moving the insert point was pushing the insert key, but I just looked it up and they actually changed that on certain machines. So if you used to use the insert key to relocate this pivot point, I need to move it to the back. The new key is actually the D key. You see I get this different changing pivot alteration here. And I'm just going to move this pivot point to the back of the feathers. What this does, guys, is this is now going to say that every arrow will be attached to a particle based upon this location. If you want the arrow to follow the particles by the tip near the point of the arrow, you would put it there, or you could put it in the center. I just like the pivot point being in the back. And what I'm going to do now is just relocate this to 0, 0, 0. But then I need it pointed in positive X direction. So I'm just going to rotate a value here, hit Control A to get this to be exactly 90. Whoops, looks like it needs to be negative. And so again, now you see it is pointing in. Look at your x-axis over here. It's pointing in. See the arrow? The positive direction. Now a shortcut here for Maya 2. If your gizmo, your little transform tool is too small, you can actually hit plus or minus to get a slightly larger version. So we now have the arrow laying at the origin with the anchor point pointing in the positive X direction. However, all this information of relocating, changing, transforming, all that needs to be what's called zeroed out. And to do that, we need to go to Edit, Delete by Type History, Modify, and Freeze Transformations. And you'll notice all my rotate, translate scales over here, by freezing the transformation, will get zeroed out. And that's very important because the transform, when we actually do an instance geometry to a particle, if that isn't zeroed out, meaning it's kind of like collapsing the stack, deleting the history, and freezing it so it's back to being a default now. Okay, so we've got the arrow pointed in positive X direction. Now where's our, this might be a good point here to just file, save scene as, and again, this is automatically going to save into the, let's see, arrows, I'll just call this arrows underscore day or something like that, and save it, and it's going to go to the folder that we made when we set project in the beginning. Now back to our tutorial, right? We basically now, and you can see you can save or you can import this. You could save it as a scene file. You could actually export this little arrow into your assets folder, and so you could actually swap it out with other things. Now let's build the emitter that shoots the wall of arrows. So in Maya, we can create a NURB surface plane that is 10 by 10, or we can just create a polygonal plane. NURBs are just lighter weight, but in this case, I'm just going to, instead of a NURB surface, I'm going to create a polygon plane. So just create a plane, send it backwards. I can scale it up. And if we change the polyplane, you can see it's already 10 by 10, which basically says that it is 10 segments by 10 segments in size, or subdivisions. And what we're going to do then is by having it be 10 by 10, every vertice or every normal or every face can then represent an archer. So I just set this up here, and I'm just going to scale it up. Now you can start to get the idea of size and scale here, because obviously I might want to shrink my arrow a bit. But remember, if we do that, to modify and freeze the transformations. Because this wall here, go ahead and turn on my wireframe unshaded so we can see this a little better. But our plane here is going to represent a squadron of archers, okay? And what I'm going to do now is just send it back here. Let's bounce over to our tutorial. Okay, rotate and line the plane so that it is aiming in the positive x direction and about negative 45 degrees on z-axis. Now, that isn't exact, and you can see when we actually have this start to emit arrows, that all we're trying to do here is just give it a little bit of an angle. Remember, these are archers, so they're going to shoot the arrows not just up into the air, but in the distance, and that'll be speed. Okay, and I'm going to move it up a little bit. So you can see now what we've got is we've got our archers. I could even come over here and name that plane. I could come over here and freeze the transformations. Okay, so we'll just call this archers. Moving along. Okay, with the plane selected under the Dynamics menu set, or what's now called Effects menu set the particle emit from surface and the option box. Okay, so we've got our archers. We need to switch now to the Effects menu set. Under End Particles, we're going to come down to, again, we're working with the legacy particles, not the end particles, which are up here. But under the legacy, we're going to Emit from Object option box. In this option box, we're going to set emitter name, which is going to be Archers. We're going to set the emitter type to being Surface. Now, what else does it say in this? It says arrow emitter, emitter type to surface, value of 25, max distance, min distance should be set to 0, and set the speed to 25. So we're going to do a rate of 25. We're going to leave distance direction at 0, but we're going to set the speed to 25. And eventually we will be able to play around with things like spread and all that. Let's go ahead and hit create. You see now it has placed a little green node here that represents that it is an emitter. Let's rewind and hit play. And of course, you can't really see the particles that are being emitted because they're so small right now. So I can hit Control A for Attribute Editor, and just for temporarily reasons, change these from being points to spheres. And now you see we've got our archers. Hit rewind, hit play, shooting particles from that surface. The problem is, our little temporary arrows here are just flying off into, we'll do that. We'll make it wireframe so we can see it. But you can see how we've got these arrows shooting up into the sky. Right now, temporarily, they're just spheres, right? But those spheres are particles, and we're going to go and attach and instance those arrows to every sphere, and then turn those spheres back to points so they don't render. Okay? Now then, see here, now we're going to come to number 3, setting up the particles. Change the timeline. Now again, we've already got our timeline set to 200 frames. Here, it says to 400. I'm not looking for a long length of time here, but it all depends on the distance our arrows need to fly to actually see them interact with the wall we're going to build. So you might need 400, you might need 300. Let's just play around with the default 200 frames right now. Hit play, you see those again. Those spheres are flying at a 45-degree angle, but there is no gravitational pull back to Earth. With the particles selected, simply add gravity. So I select my particles, I go up to my field solvers, and I add gravity, which is again a default of 9.8 and a -1 y-axis. Now I hit play, and you see our arrows or our temporary spheres are flying. Now, they're also lasting forever. Okay? Now an arrow doesn't just disappear, but we can actually start to now set parameters to actually control how far these are. And this is where it's kind of nice to kind of just start to build a little bit more of the set. Oh, you can see here, particles selected. I actually show you how to convert them to spheres so that they'll easily be visible. Now, here we are going to instance the arrow mesh for the particles. So select the arrow and choose particle instant replacement. We need to convert this little arrow here. Okay, so I'm going to select the arrow. And I'm going to go now to the End Particle menu set, go down to the Legacies, and find the instancer, which is, oh, it's up here. See, Create Instancer. And this also gives us an option box so we can properly name this. Arrow Instance. Okay? And we got rotation units, rotation order, level of detail, geometry. We can even do cycles. Now, a cycle is something if you make like a flying, I don't know, maybe you make a flying bird and you want to make a flock of birds, or maybe you make a character. You want to do an entire like crowd simulation, and you could have one character walking in a walk cycle. Cycle basically offsets that so that everyone's not moving in the same timing. We're not going to deal with that just yet. And we're just going to come here and just hit Create. And just like that, notice what happens over here. Immediately, every particle we created has now got itself a arrow attached to it. So just zoom out, hit rewind, and hit play. The problem, of course, is our arrows are leaving, they're emitted straight horizontally, and they're flying horizontally, and they're staying horizontally. Well, we know arrows don't use that motion. They have what are called arc, okay? And they move with the gravity. So we want these to be aiming direction based upon the gravity pull. Okay? So, hit Create Attribute Editor under the parameters for instancer and choose Arrow Instance. So again, if your arrows didn't immediately jump onto our particles, you can actually come up here to the particle shape, find the instancer, which is right here, and choose the arrow instance that we built. It just so happened there was no other instance, so it automatically knew to attach them. But now we need to control how they fly. So you see, we're going to go to Reopen Particle Editor under Instancer Rotation Options. Okay, so let's go there. Here it is right here. And here we have rotation options. See this? Here we need to change this to be aim direction based upon velocity. So, aim direction is set to none. Let's change it to velocity. And suddenly you see our arrows are flying in the proper direction. And now we might as well take these back from spheres to being a point. So now you see our arrows are flying. Now, the problem I have with this is a couple of factors. Number one, they're lasting forever, so we need to create a target for them. And we can put that target at a different distance, and then we can play around with speed random, or even the angle to say arrows need to fly higher or need to fly, more horizontal. So we're going to create a castle wall and a floor. So let's start by just adding a simple floor. Okay, just like that. Make sure it is at 0, which means I might want to move this guy back just a little bit and just a little more up, because we don't want our wall of arrows inside our floor, or else some of these arrows won't pass through, because we're going to need to make collidables so that the arrows hit the floor and hit the wall. Let's make our simple castle wall. Doesn't have to be a fancy one here. Let's go ahead and open our attribute editor and change this to 3x3x3 or something like that. Move it up so it is above the floor. Remember, if you don't want to guess using the perspective window here, you can always come here and you get a clear example from the side view of what you're dealing with. And let's put our wall back here. And I'm going to have some fun. And by the way, I'm just using my space bar to navigate between the single pane and the 4 pane. Let's make this look like a little bit more of a castle. Let's see here. Width, height, depth. Let's change this width here to 8. Nope. Back to 3. There we go. And I could even change that to be 1 if I want to here. And I'm going to right click, choose face, choose every other one here, back to our modeling mesh tools, edit mesh and extrude. And let's just make this into something that looks a little bit more like a castle. F8 gets us back to component selection. And let's move it all the way to the back. So you see, we've got arrows and we've got wall and floor. Hit play. Now, here's a problem. The arrows are going through the ground, right? And the arrows are not reaching our target. So let's first make these collide. So I select the arrows. You can see I'm actually getting here. Make some arrows stick, others fall. Okay? And that's by doing a geoconnector for collision. Okay? And it's all right here. Reopen the particles. So let's do that. So I want my arrows to collide with the floor first, so I select arrows, shift floor. Under the FX end particles, we're going to make collide. Okay? Let's rewind and hit play. And now you'll see the arrows are going to collide, but what's the problem? It's too bouncy, right? Well, that's setting the parameters now for the geoconnector for the floor. So I select the floor, Control A, find my geoconnector, which I can even call floor geoconnector or something like that, just so I know which it is. And we've got parameters for friction and resilience. Remember, resilience is bounce. So I'm just going to put a little bit of bounce to it. So again, they kind of skip off the ground. Or I could say no bounce at all, 100% friction, or full friction. Watch now. I hit play and rewind, and now they're going to pierce. Now again, this is a simple tutorial here. There are ways of creating so that they stick into the ground facing down, but because they're following velocity, the second they stop moving, they lay flat. And really, that's fine for our purposes here. We're not going to get too fancy. But the problem is our arrows aren't reaching our wall. So I'm going to go ahead and find my emitter, Archer 2, and I'm just going to increase the speed here and speed random a little bit so that I can actually reach the wall. Whoops, okay, that's too much. Let's bring that down, bring that down. So in order for the arrows to fly faster, just like as if you were going to, actually shoot an arrow yourself, you pull back harder, thus you get more speed, so the arrows travel further. Now you notice there are a few arrows that are falling through the floor. That's because our archers here need to be moved up a little bit more. All right, so let's just do this a little bit more random. We'll make this be exactly 35 in my case. Now again, that's going to be a number that'll be different for all of you because of the scale and size of the world that you're building here. There we go. Oops. And there we have it. And again, the arrows are pretty much hitting the wall. I actually do just a little bit more, one little bit more here in the archers of my emitter and make this be a little bit more random. The problem, of course, now the archers are flying, or the arrows are flying, but they're going through the wall. So again, now we need to set up another geoconnector. Select arrows, shift, select wall, end particle, make collide. And that's now going to create a geoconnector for the wall, which is, we can call it wall _ geoconnector. And here we can have a little bit of bounce and a little bit of friction. So some stick and some bounce off. Again, what is the wall material? If the wall material is wood, they may stick. If it's concrete, they may bounce off. Okay? And again, a lot of people will say, well, how do we get them to actually stick to the wall? Well, that would be full friction, no bounce. And there are scripts that you can write. There's ways you can actually do this, okay? But we're not going to fight it. We're not going to battle it right now. We're just going to, this is all we really need to do is understand instance particles, collisions, and whatnot. Okay? Now it says, I do provide here how to get some stick and some bounce, and that's actually using an expression of a geoconnection friction random value. We're not going to do that though. Now, some stick while others bounce and fall. Now, I can come up and even change my gravity level so that they will actually stick, because a lot of them are falling because gravity is going all the way. It's unlimited gravity. But if I really want to change that, okay, I can go find my gravity. I'll just open it up here and use my outliner tool to select my gravity, move it back to where it needs to be started. I'll actually use the side view here, and here's my grid. Let's turn off my grid and turn on my wireframe so we can see. So I moved the gravity all the way back here, but the gravity actually can have a distance control. You see, it's not using distance, but if I say use mass distance, I can then hit the T tool on my keyboard and move this a little bit and tell the max distance to basically stop right before the wall, meaning gravity will end here, so these will now stick to the wall and stop. Okay? And they're not going to fall anymore. Let's hit the space bar and go back to our perspective to see. Okay? Now you see they're going all the way into the wall, right? They're piercing the wall completely because it's the particle that's doing the friction and the stop. Well, what if I want the arrows to be sticking out of the wall a little bit? Well, that's going back to our good old arrow. Remember this? And we put the center anchor here. Well, remember, I can move, if I move the pivot point, hit D, and move the pivot point back up here, now only the tip will go into the wall. But we have to move this all back to 0. And then now we need to adjust this by freezing it again. Modify, freeze. And now those arrows that hit the wall, you see, are now sticking out of the wall. See? So in a nutshell, guys, this is all that the tutorial really calls for. You don't have to go much deeper than this. You don't have to add some lighting. Remember, it's a performance issue we're looking for here. But let's set this up so that we can properly do a good performance play blast. So to do that, one thing I like to do is, again, change the render settings so that we can, again, this doesn't matter here, the PNG, unless you're going to render it, then I'd recommend doing a targa. We can change this to the bottom, name, number, extension, start frame, end frame. We'll say 200. Oops, didn't mean to close that out just yet. Let's get it back there. Because I wanted to find this again as a 1920 1080, which is a HD 1080. Okay, 1920 1080. And I can hit close. That now means I can go to my view, camera settings, and turn on my resolution gate, which shows me exactly. I could also, even if this is kind of neat too, turn on a film gate. And that now shows me what is going to be rendered in my shot. Do that angle right there. This is pretty cool, by the way, if you get like down, like you're maybe a person that's standing on the wall and you see these arrows coming at you. It's another angle that's pretty cool. See that? But I'm going to go back to just the wide view here, just to show the full performance. All right, so now we need to do is save this as a play blast. So we go to Window, Play Blast, Option Box, based upon you start and end. Well, I could do the time slider because it's already the 200. I don't have to do that. Okay, I'm going to do it. I could do it as an AVI, 100% quality, from the render settings, scale of 1, save the file, and give it a name. So again, since I'm just kind of asking for the play blast as this example, we can give it the last name underscore, right? We'll call it Raining Arrows or something like that. But I want to see the last name Raining Arrows in there. So when we hit play blast, it's now going to calculate that. And you see it is making a play blast, a video version of our performance of our arrows. And you see it play back right there. And this got saved, of course, to our movie folder that we built for the project. Now, before I actually continue and just talk about, okay, taking this in After Effects, putting your name and what we're seeing here, right? Like I showed you guys last week in After Effects, let's just kind of do a few more simple things here with the arrows. For example, this is pretty neat. Because I could change this and I could have these, like rotate this and have it go taller or higher. I could actually go into my emitter, my Archer emitter. Let's see, particles, archers, and come up here to where it says rates per particle. And watch this. I'm going to just go randomly. Let's set key. Let's take this down to, turn on my auto key, take it back down to 0, set key, change it to 30, back to 0, 30, 0. And what I've done there is I've basically set it up to where I can turn my arrows on and off. See? So it looks like they're reloading, like a battalion would. So it's not just a continuous flood of arrows constantly going, right? You get waves of those arrows. If you want more, you can go back to those and you can actually make more. Now, you notice I'm not seeing my keys in my timeline here. That's because I have the particle selected. If I choose the actual archer, you see, now I get my keys, and then I can come up and choose, you know, a much larger number here to have more arrows actually come out. See? Because I'm turning the arrow emitter on, the rate on and off, see? So I get pulsating versions of this. Another way to think about this too is I can actually go and deform even the shape of my archers. I could model it, right? Or I actually like to use this one sometimes. Let's find the deformers, modeling. Actually, it's not modeling. Deform, and find the non-linear bend. Give it a value here. And you see the nonlinear bend is showing the direction it's bending. Well, we need to change that bend so that it is aligned to our plane. See? I'm going to go that way with it. And because I did that bend, I can now give the illusion here of my arrows not just flying in a straight line, but like an actual rounded out battalion. And you're going to see they're going to go in a much wider direction. Because I've used the nonlinear bend deformer to control the shape of my emitter from surface. How about some more fun with this, right? Watch if I actually take my original arrow here, right? So now I have my original arrow here. And watch how neat this is. Let's go back to effects. And watch, there's a default effect here called fire. hit the option box here. Object on fire, arrow, okay? Emit from the surface. I can change density. I can say radius, fire intensity. Let's maybe make it a little more intense on the fire. Spread, direction, and hit create. And watch what's really cool there. Is if I rewind and hit play now, you see that did that actually work? Let me see if that worked. Doesn't look like our arrow actually caught fire. Maybe they changed this effect here. Let's see. Particle 2. Let's try that again. Yeah, see, I'm cache playback disabled. Let me check my show and make sure everything's on. Yeah, for some reason that fire is not working there. But again, you can actually have this give off fire, right? And then group it and have the group be the instance, and now every arrow that's flying is essentially going to be on fire as an instance. It just doesn't, you can look it up, I'm sure. They probably have a tutorial at greater depth. I don't want to get too busy into that because, again, I just want to focus on what we created. So, because we did that play blast, you go into your movies folder now, and there it is. And this is now what you would upload to the assignment for the in-class Raining Arrows assignment. All right. Really appreciate it, guys. And again, remember, you can do anything here. I mean, you can make cars. You could replace particles with any kind of geometry that you want. I mean, without getting too, I don't have any models just loaded up on my machine right now, but anything can be an instance. So you could have boats, you can have cars, you could have airplanes, spaceships, right? So you could literally have spaceships as an instance geometry. You could have, the whole idea is it's assigning geometry as an instance, not a copy, but a non-weighted instance, a clone, to each arrow, or each particle, rather. And that's pretty cool in its sense right there. So have fun with this, guys. Looking forward to see what you can do with your play blast. Remember, if you submit it, make sure you take this into After Effects, that play blast, add your name to it so that you don't have to worry about doing it at a later time when you have to create, let's say, your final demo reel of all the projects that you created. Good luck, and I will talk to you guys next week where we're moving into what are called rigid body dynamics.